and we can kick things off if you're ready, Nathan.
Anytime.
Awesome. So I'll just start things. So I think most people on here know who I am, but if you don't, I'm Zap, Z-A-P. I'm the community lead at the Entrepreneur Center. Super fun job that right now is just connecting people virtually and sending you all content. As you just heard me chatting about, I am really hoping that we reopen soon, but just keep reading those emails to stay updated on that and let me know what content you want to see, because we've been trying to push out as much as possible. Today, I don't like to force people to mute at the beginning just because I don't know, makes sitting in silence a little more awkward, but I'll probably mute everyone during the talk. And then feel free to chat in any of your questions, and Nathan, I'll kind of manage the chat in the best way possible. And then we'll probably open things up, whether you want to chat in or just actually speak. We're in close company, so I feel good about it. Anyways, I'm so happy to have Nathan Becker here all the way from San Francisco. This is one of the exciting things about these virtual times, and just coming to virtually connect with Nashville about capital and all those exciting topics. But hardest thing is we can't actually do a round of applause, but we can do a virtual clap just to welcome you here. Otherwise, Nathan, I'll hand it off to you.
Cool. All right. Can you hear me okay? Are we good? Okay,
We're
perfect.
good.
So I'll go into full screen mode on the slides. So if someone, I won't be able to see if someone has like an important chat. So Haley, could you
Yes, I'll let you know.
interrupt me? Okay, perfect. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for having me. I'm a little bit bummed because I was supposed to come out to Nashville and I was so excited to come out, and so we'll have to do that in the future. I've never actually been, and it's on my bucket list or whatever. So, all right. I will share my, looking okay? You see my stuff?
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, this talk is a pretty long talk, but I'll go through it kind of fast. If you do have questions along the way, feel free to ask them maybe in the chat, and Haley can moderate, or I'm happy to spend as much time at the end as we want as well. Just very briefly, my name is Nathan. I run a startup called foundersuite. We make software tools for raising capital. We've been at it about 4 or 5 years now and having some good success metrics with our customers. They've raised about $2 billion, which is exciting. Before launching foundersuite, I spent about 12 years actively raising capital for startups as fractional CFO and did a lot of work on that. And this talk is basically everything I've learned from 12 plus years of raising money in an hour or less. First off is how not to do it. Hunter Walk is a seed VC, and I just love this tweet. Will you introduce me to investors? Too broad to be acted upon. But this is how a lot of founders approach fundraising. They just start asking everyone they know if they can make some connections to investors. And it's a logical approach, but it's too unfocused. It's also putting the hard work of figuring out who you should be approaching on the shoulders of the other person, where really that's your job as your company's CEO. When I was a consultant, companies would hire me to do that work, and I would spend 100 hours of research building a target list of investors. So instead of having this unfocused way, we like to have a really focused way of doing this, kind of borrowing a page from sales, right? If you've ever been in B2B sales, it follows a pretty straightforward approach where you're building a list of leads or targets or prospects, you're qualifying that list, you're engaging with them, and ultimately you're driving everyone on your list towards a yes or no decision, towards a close. We can apply that to fundraising as well. We like to think of fundraising like a funnel, right? Top of the funnel, you're building that large list of potential investors. Then you're screening, filtering, qualifying that list. Then, especially if you're going after venture capital, you don't just find the right fund, but you got to find the right person, the right partner or decision maker at that fund. And then number 4 is where it differs a little bit by sales. So much of fundraising is about the warm introduction. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Those introductions lead to pitch meetings. you're crushing your pitch meetings on Zoom or whatever, format you're doing these days. That leads to term sheet discussions, diligence. You get through that and you're selling shares of your company. So really fundraising is just another sales process. And when we break it into this step-by-step approach, I find it takes away a lot of the anxiety and like frustration that founders have with this. It's a very learnable skill. Step one is to build that top of the funnel. So, a couple things here. I assume everyone's pretty early stage, especially if you're at the pre-seed, seed, angel round. You need at least 200 names on your target list. And frankly, in today's market environment, I'm telling our customers, if you thought you needed 100 investors top of the funnel, make it 200 now. Dialing up the size of your funnel, because fundraising is just a numbers game. When I raised our seed round, I pitched over 200 investors and ended up with 1 seed VC and 10 angels on our cap table. So you can do that math. That's about a 5% conversion rate, right? That also means I was getting rejected 95% of the time. And keep in mind, I had been fundraising for startups for, 12 years. So I hopefully knew what I was doing. I'm still getting rejected 95% of the time. I think in today's market, I'm telling founders, that 5% conversion rate might be going down to 3 or 4%. So further reason why you need more top of the funnel. How do we actually do this? So AngelList is a good place to start. You can search around here. And you've got ways to search by like location, by industry, augmented reality as it shows here. You also can search by school and company. So if you went to whatever, Vanderbilt or something, you can find like angel investors or other investors that went to the same school. Great icebreaker. And the company is kind of interesting. If you worked at a larger firm, finding investors who also worked there, another great icebreaker. I want to say there's about 35,000 investors on here. Skews angel, but you can also search some VCs on there. One of our subliminal marketing messages here is we have a database in foundersuite. We've been going very broad in this database. So we've got about 40,000 funds. And those funds include venture capital, family offices, fund of funds, strategic investors. We're even adding some like sovereign wealth funds and private equity and stuff like that. And we also have about 100,000 angels and high net worth. And we've tagged them all by their name. So you can search by name, type of investor, VC, angel, accelerator, etc. Industry, med tech, fintech, whatever, SaaS, consumer, or location, And then we've collected, I don't know if you can see it very well, but we've got like descriptions, contact information for many of them, and then social links. There are links to their webpage, LinkedIn page, whatever. And typically people will search around here. And then when they see someone they like, do a little more research, open up their LinkedIn page, kind of read about them. And if they look good, you click that button, add to research, to populate them onto your list. So hopefully it can save you some time in helping build that list of 200 potential prospects. CrunchBase is another useful tool in this exercise. The way I like to use CrunchBase is I make a list of 10 or 12 companies that are similar to mine, but not directly competitive. Similar, but not directly competitive. And I plug each one by one into CrunchBase, and I see who funded them at the relevant stage that I'm at, right? So you're kind of reverse hunting the right investors based on deals they've done in the past. If you have an investor or you land an investor, you can also plug that investor in and you can see who they co-invest with. So that's another great way to use CrunchBase. You can also search it. They've got other search functionality. They don't have contact information, but pretty useful. Lots and lots of other places to build this funnel. These first 4, PE Hub, Inside Venture, Venture Pulse, Strictly VC. I kind of like Strictly VC the best. These are newsletters you can subscribe to, email newsletters. And basically when a startup raises capital, they'll announce it in here. So you can see who's getting funded and who's backing them. Also, when a new venture fund is formed, or when a new venture fund raises a new fund, they typically announce it in these newsletters. And that's a really good signal. The best venture fund to be approaching is one that just raised a new fund. They've got fresh capital to put to work. I don't know how familiar everyone is with the venture capital model, but typically a fund will raise a new fund called a $50 million fund. They'll invest half of that in the first 2 or 3 years in a bunch of deals, and then they'll save half of that to double down on their winners, right? So, best time to be pitching a new fund is when they just raised a new fund. Conferences can be interesting. Obviously, there's no conferences happening right now, but go back and Google, all the conferences in your marketplace for the last 3 years. Investors love to, Haley, I keep seeing the little chat. Is there a chat?
Oh, it's just us. Don't worry. I would stop you if it was important.
Okay, perfect. No worries. I'll keep rolling. Let me know if there is something. Google your conferences, right? If you're in blockchain or AI or wellness, whatever it is, find all the conferences in your space. Investors love to build their own brand by getting out there on the speaking circuit. So you can often pick up some pretty good leads just by looking at the agenda of previous conferences, especially in niche spaces. Quora, TechCrunch, Medium, I'm sure you're all familiar with these, but there's a lot of good content. Twitter's another great place. PitchBook and CB Insights, these are paid databases, pretty expensive. I want to say PitchBook's about $15,000 a year. I'm not sure how much CB Insights, I think it's even more, but the data is very deep. I've used PitchBook, and you can get like who led the deal. You can find different deals, who led the deal, who was follow-on investor, who was even what the valuation was on a deal. So lots of really good stuff there. If you can find a friend who's got access to this, you play with it can be really good. And then last but not least, I'm going to show you 2 ways to mine your own personal network to continue to build your funnel. So first is using LinkedIn. So I have a paid plan now, but this works equally well on just a free plan. And basically, this is just my homepage. I'm just going up here and doing a nice generic search like angel investor. Okay, 82,000 results. That's probably the entire universe of people within LinkedIn. That's obviously too large a list to do anything with. But what I can do is apply some filters. I might do a search on first degree connections just to kind of remind myself who I'm connected to. But for the purposes of this, I want to do second degree connections. And then I often will do a location. This will be interesting. Okay, not a huge list, but still some, 73 results. This means there are 73 people that have the word angel investor in their title in Nashville that I have at least one mutual connection to. And theoretically, I should be able to connect to them because I have a mutual connection. That doesn't mean all 73 of these folks are relevant for me. So what I do next is I kind of skim down here. And David, clinical research, that's probably medical, so I'll skip him maybe. But let me just open up Alex. I'll command click or right click and open up anyone who looks, kind of potentially interesting into a new tab. Put up David as well. And then I just spend, 30 seconds per profile skimming it, right? And a lot of times folks will either specifically state what they invest in, or they'll list their portfolio companies that they have invested in, like this guy right here, Snack Pass, boom. So this is looking fairly food related, right? Finless Food, Snack Pass. I'm probably going to skip him. So Command W closes that tab. And I just move on to the next guy, Key Gouda. Let's see if he lists his companies. Not so much, but I'm looking for, like, my space is kind of fintech, SMB software, SaaS. So anyone who's sort of in those, you know, spaces, I would, let's say he did do that kind of deal, I would then figure out my mutual connection, right? And I would make a note of that on my CRM, which I'll show you about a little bit better. Like, who do I know amongst our mutual connections the best? I would mark that person down as my intro source. And I just keep, oh, okay, this guy's a sailor. So I'd probably definitely add him to my, my investor board, even if it's just to, like, yeah, actually this guy's great. He looks like he's done some financial stuff. So he'd probably understand what we're building at FounderSuite. So, and then same process here, I add him to my board and I see who our best mutual connection is and make a note of that. Okay, so that's how to kind of mine your own LinkedIn network to add investors to your board or to your target list. I'm going to show you one other way I did this using, oops, sorry. Using our CRM tool. So going back to the main board, this is kind of a slightly messy investor pipeline. But what I want to show you here is this column called Steve B. Leads. So Steve Bennett, he's a real person. He's a professor of finance. What I did is I came over here, added a column, called it Steve B. Leads, went over into settings and team, invited him in to be a member of my account. And I said, hey, Steve, I'm building out my investor pipeline. Can you, I've added you a column, or I've created a column for you. Can you fill up that column with some people from your network you'd be willing to introduce me to? And he did that. He added 10 or 15 names to his column. I also asked him to look at the names in my research column, and if he knows anyone, you know, mark himself as a potential connector. But basically having a structured way of asking my advisors to open up their network is what worked here. If I had just called Steve and said, Steve, I'm raising money, who should I talk to? It's just too ambiguous, but having a structured way of asking him to open up his network worked really well. And I repeated this with 5 or 6 other advisors, and I generated about 60 good, solid investor leads that I could get a warm intro to just by having a structured way of doing it. Okay, I'm gonna keep rolling here. You know, once you really get into this investor research, you'll start to kind of find investors all over the place, as Yoda says here. And keep in mind, this is a lot of work. As a general rule of thumb, it's like, I estimate about 20 to 30 minutes per good solid lead that you add, 20 to 30 minutes of research. So everything I'm showing you now is how to build that target list of, say, 200 names of potential investors. What we actually want to do next is start removing people from that list, crossing them off. And there's a few reasons for this. One is, so much of your job as the founder is to get momentum going for your deal. And it's really hard to get momentum going if you're pitching and pursuing, you know, poorly qualified fits, right? The best, going back to our fundraising as a sales metaphor, the best salespeople don't just chase every prospect. They spend a lot of time qualifying their leads, ranking them, prioritizing them, so they're spending their time really efficiently. And we want to do that with fundraising as well. So anyone who's invested in a competitor, you know, just cross them off your list right away. If they're ethical, they won't really want to talk to you. If they're unethical, they will send your pitch deck to your competitor. Seen it happen. Number 2, this applies to venture funds. If a venture fund has not raised a new fund in the last 2 or 3 years, they're probably only doing follow-on deals to their existing portfolio companies. Doesn't mean you don't want to talk to them. It might be a good one to practice your pitch on, but it's easy to waste a lot of time talking to venture funds that don't have dry powder to put to work. Same with angel investors. If you look at their profile on AngelList and all their deals are from, you know, 4 years ago, they might be taking a break. Wrong sector, wrong stage, wrong geographic location. This should be pretty obvious, all right? If you're medical devices startup, you would not be pitching a fintech company. stage sometimes trips people up. Like you see Growth Capital, a firm that calls themselves Growth Capital Fund. That actually means later stage, not early stage. Geographic location, you know, some investors, both angels and VCs, are specific. Like I found this one VC fund that sounded perfect for us. They did like fintech, SaaS, SMB, but they're up in Seattle, and on their website they say we invest in Pacific Northwest companies. You know, I removed them from my list. Not a good fit because I'm not based there. Some funds actually have a geographic specificity based on where their money comes from. If a venture fund's money is coming from the, you know, Tennessee Teachers Association, they might have a mandate to invest in Tennessee startups, which is good, right? And I think many VCs and even angels are less location agnostic, which is good for you guys. Even 5-10 years ago, many investors really only looked at local deals, kind of the bicycle ride away from the office kind of thing, proximity. Now a lot of investors are doing deals all over the place, which is great. As a general rule of thumb, I tell founders, you know, be removing about 25 to 30% of that initial target list so that what remains is a really highly focused, highly targeted list of investors. This will help you get momentum when you actually start talking to them. And again, this takes a little time, but don't skip it. It'll really pay dividends when you get out there hustling. Once you've got that qualified list, now we want to figure out our best intro source to each person. LinkedIn is kind of the tool of choice here. If you're using FounderSuite, we've hopefully collected their LinkedIn link and you can just click on it and open up. But basically you want to see if you have any mutual connections. And if you do, there's a hierarchy of who to ask for that introduction. The best person to ask is someone who has made Tim money in the past. This could, you know, be an investor. Second best is someone who's done deals with Tim in the past. Maybe an angel that feeds him deals. Could be another VC he's co-invested with. Third best, and here's where you should pay attention, is someone that Tim has invested in, a portfolio company founder. We'll come back to that. Fourth best is what I call professional connectors. These are the biz dev guys and gals at the big law firms and accounting firms. You know, they kind of know everyone in the startup ecosystem, but they make a lot of introductions, so the signal's sometimes not so great. Fifth on the list is, you know, someone Tim met at a conference a couple of years ago. They connected, but they don't really know each other. If you have zero mutual connections to your target investor, what do? This is called funding hacks. So the hack here is to reach out to 2 or 3 portfolio company founders that Tim has invested in, even cold email, and just be very kind of conversational. Like, hey, I see Tim put some money into you guys. I'm the CEO of a startup doing XYZ. I'd love to hear what it's been like working with Tim. Is he active? Is he passive? Has he been helpful? You kind of get a dialogue going with that company founder. It's okay to ask for the introduction to Tim. And the reason this hack works pretty well is, you know, that founder was doing exactly what you're doing 6 months ago. So there's an empathy there. And Tim spent, you know, 2 or 3 months getting to know that founder. There's a level of trust there. So it's a really good kind of backdoor way to getting that warm introduction. If you're not willing to take the time to do that, you know, there's always the cold email. Cold email is really ineffective in the fundraising context. It's easy to find Tim's email address. It's like tim@dfj.com. But these guys and gals are getting 50 to 100 warm introductions a day. Even in a COVID market like today, their volume is still very high. Maybe it's a little less than that, but they're getting 50 warm introductions a day from people they know and trust. So your cold email, if it's even read, already has kind of like a black mark on it. Now we've built this list. We've qualified down. We've mapped everyone into our connection path. Now we need to get organized because we're about to really rock and roll. I used to build these spreadsheets for startups, which work great for the first week or two, but then they become very, very messy. And this is my little product placement here. So bear with me through the commercial break, but this is why we built FounderSuite, which is basically a CRM for managing a pipeline. And I'll just show you what that means very quickly. it's kind of like a horizontal pipeline, right? So, or horizontal funnel where you've got research, contacted, pitch, diligence, committed, and said no. And the bad joke I always make is like, your job as founder, it's like a chess game. Your job is to be moving all these cards, across the board through the stages of fundraising. And if you move them all into the committed column, you win the game. If you move them all into the no column, you lose the game. But practically speaking, I tell founders, like, block off, 4 hours, 3 or 4 days a week, just to work your funnel like a good salesperson, right? Everyone who you've contacted or been connected with, what can you do to kind of nudge them along into a pitch meeting? Everyone you've pitched, what can you do to nudge them along into term discussions and diligence? Obviously, everyone in diligence, if you're not familiar with what diligence means, it's usually a long list of information that the investor wants from you. We got our term sheet for our seed round on a Friday. On Monday, our VC sent us a 150 item diligence list, everything from like articles of incorporation to access to our Google Analytics to personal references, all that stuff. So if you're in diligence, there's a lot of tasks that have to happen, before you kind of get to the no stage. So block off time in your calendar to kind of work on your funnel. Just one other thing I'll show you, kind of an advanced hack, so to speak. This is where you can be adding notes, activities. If you've got a meeting with this person, right? Meet on, say meet for coffee, but meet on Zoom. You can then push it out to your calendar of preference, attach the files. So what's the pitch deck or term sheet you sent this person? And this is my favorite. You can connect your email. So all the email conversations with this investor get threaded in here. So it's kind of this one single system of record for notes, tasks, files, emails. And if you're working with like an advisor or mentor, they can also integrate their email, and you can see, if you choose to, this is an option, you can see each other's emails. So you can see what your advisor has been emailing back and forth with this investor. We call it high visibility fundraising, and it's pretty powerful, sometimes a little scary. So there's my sales pitch. You can also customize all these columns. Like I made a column called qualified and mapped. This is where I move people after I've done that kind of qualifying step and mapping the connection path. I also made a column where I'm adding my connectors. These are like my power connectors I'm going to be leaning on for a lot of introductions. Okay, there's my sales pitch. Thanks for sitting through that. Whether you use this or maybe you have your own CRM that you've put time into, you really need some way of staying on top of all the activities that are about to happen. If you've got 200 investors in your list, every interaction leads to 2 or 3 follow-up action items. So you need some way of staying organized, because again, fundraising is about momentum. We have a little to-do list tab I forgot to mention, but fundraising is about getting momentum going, and it's hard to get momentum going if you're running a sloppy process. If things are slipping through the cracks or not happening in a fast manner, you're never going to get fundraising for your deal, and deals are driven by momentum. So just to emphasize this, the chances of you raising money is a function of getting momentum going. Momentum is a function of tempo and pace, right? So that's the reason you need a CRM. All right, thanks for my sales pitch. Before we actually get out there and talk to these 200 investors, just make sure your pitch deck is amazing. You're part of the EC, so do some virtual pitch practice with other founders. I tell founders, don't get out there talking to investors until you've given your pitch like at least 10 times to people who will give you honest, hard feedback on it, right? The biggest mistake I see is people go out with a crappy pitch that's confusing or muddled or just not compelling. You don't get to go back to that investor a month later and try again, right? They've already said no. So make sure your pitch is crushing it even before talking to investors. Also, we talked about kind of prioritizing your investors. I would probably put a few of your kind of B team or C team investors as your first couple pitches, just to get more practice before you kind of talk to your A list. Another little hack there. You should also have probably a little financial forecast or model. If you're going to go raise $1 million. Show me as an investor how you're going to spend that money and where it will take you, right? Last but not least, if you have a one-page executive summary, that's useful too.
Hey, Nathan,
Okay.
you had a question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
If you can integrate Groove with FounderSuite the same way sales guys do with Salesforce.
I actually don't know what Groove is. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what Groove is.
Oh,
We
bummer,
don't
no
integrate
worries.
with it, obviously, if I don't even know what it is. So no, you can email, you can integrate your email. So that's what we can integrate with. Yeah, hopefully that answers it. Happy to dig into that a little more in the Q&A. But it's conceptually similar, right? Like some of these tools, I don't want to say we're like Salesforce for fundraising, but other people have said that. All right, let's just recap our steps. We built a list of 200 investors. We qualified it. We mapped our connection paths. We've loaded them all up into a CRM, hopefully FunderSuite. We've got our pitch deck. It's ready to go. Now we're just about to get out there and hustle. When you're doing the research of how you're connected to investors, a lot of times you'll find that, you'll have a couple power connectors, right? People who are really well connected to everyone. And so instead of like bugging Jeff is a real person. He works at NASDAQ, so he knows lots of people. Instead of bugging him one by one, I put together this list for him like, hey, Jeff, I'm raising money. I see that you're connected to these people. Do you know them well enough to make an intro? And he can just respond, yes, I know Tom, I know Jessica, I know Clark. I don't know the other people. Boom, boom. He can just yes, no, yes, no. For everyone he says, yes, I'm happy to do an intro, I put together a new clean email thread, and this is the intro request email. Notice how short it is. Common mistake I see with founders is in this intro email, they'll put a 40 megabyte pitch deck and 6 paragraphs describing their entire history of the business. Investors don't want that. Trust me on this. Investors have ADD. They want to skim something short and sweet and get a feel for it. So a couple attributes of this. Subject line, Jeff, can you intro me to Clint? That's the target investor. FounderSuite seed round, what we're raising. FFVC leading. We had a lead investor by this point and 2/3 of the round committed. So I put that in the subject line. Obviously, we didn't start off with that, but whatever your like single most exciting, sexy data point is about your business, put it in the subject line. Maybe it's a great partnership or a month-over-month growth rate, whatever it is. Again, these guys and gals are getting 50 of these a day. You want to make sure they open your email. Then, Jeff, good chatting with you. I'm raising a seed round for our investor management and reporting platform, kind of talking about what we do, and then a link to our website. A lot of founders make the mistake of not having a link to their website. And then the ask, could you introduce me to Clint? Then kind of the why. He's got a good track record in our space. And then I noticed this guy went to Grinnell. Haley, you probably know Grinnell in Iowa, a little tiny college that everyone's passionate about who went there. So I put that in there just to personalize this a little bit. And then I include a link to our deck. And this is hosted on FounderSuite. So I'm kind of showing off our own product. We have a pitch deck hosting tool. But it's also used to qualify this guy a little bit. I want him to click on our deck. And if he looks at it and says, not a good fit, I'd rather him opt out now versus like spending time to set up a meeting or Zoom and go through that, right? So it's another way of kind of pre-qualifying him. And this is not our full deck. This is like what I call a teaser deck. It's problem, solution, market, team, and traction, right? 5 slides or so. Problem, solution, market, team, and traction. And that's really all you need for this teaser deck. If Clint, so all Jeff has to do now is hit forward. Hey, Clint, do you want to take this introduction? Can I connect you guys? Nate's a good buddy. Send. Hey, Jessica, can I introduce you to Nate? He's a good friend. Send. Jeff, my connector can bang out, 5 or 10 of these intro really quickly. And if Clint does want to take the meeting, I can also see if he looked at my deck and how much time he spent. So I kind of know how much he knows about us. Making it easy for my connector to do their job. Okay, so it's, the curtain's up. It's showtime here. It's hustle time. If you haven't watched HBO's Silicon Valley, season number 1. It's so funny and spot on. And I know it's based in Silicon Valley, but it's like universal. Richard is the CEO of this fictional, Pied Piper company. He's an introvert. He's an engineer. He just wants to be writing compression algorithms, but instead he's got to get out there and meet all these investors. These investors are all really smart. There's like real statistic is 40% of VCs went to either Stanford or Harvard. Many of them have very large egos, and investing is what they do all day long, every day. They're professionals at it. Whereas for Richard, it's his first time. So it can be very intimidating and stressful. And the only way to really overcome that is to what I call channel your inner hustler, kind of treat it like a game and actually have fun with it. So otherwise you'll go crazy. So for, so a couple hustle tips, asking our connectors for those introductions all around the same time frame. I call this the Blitzkrieg approach. And what we're trying to do here is get momentum going for your deal. Almost every time you have a pitch meeting with an investor, they'll ask you, so how's the round coming together? That's their little way of probing, does this deal have momentum, or is it something I can just sit back, watch, and wait, which is investors' natural inclination. You want to be able to answer that with, hey, we just kicked this off. I know it's a tough market, but we've got 10 meetings this week, all on Zoom. We've got 12 Zoom meetings next week. We're running a pretty efficient process using foundersuite, of course, and I'm looking to close out by the end of June. We think we can actually get that done. You're showing that this deal's in motion, that it has momentum. And investors kind of have this like sixth sense of whether a deal has momentum or whether it's getting stale. So your job, keep banging the table on this, your job as a CEO is to get momentum for your deal. And granted, it's a little harder right now because investors are still adjusting to work from home and everything, but that will change, and kind of getting ready for the thaw, I think, is what you can do. We can talk about this maybe in the Q&A. I don't know if I would start a new round right now, but there's a lot of stuff you can do to kind of warm up investors for the future. Your pitch, you're going out there, you're pitching. If you have a co-founder, have him or her sit next to you and write down all the questions that the investors ask. Go back and make an appendix slide to answer those questions. When I was raising our seed round, I would go have 2 or 3 meetings, come back, put kids to bed, crack open a beer, and work on my pitch deck every night for an hour. And by the time we actually raise money, we're on version number 42. And, these two things are synergistic. We're getting momentum going for the deal, and our pitch is getting better and better as we go along. And these two things kind of amplify each other. Leveraging VCs off each other, as you get momentum, as you get meetings, and then eventually some soft commits and some potential term sheets, you want to be relaying that information. You never want to exaggerate or lie, but as you build, traction, you want to be communicating that to the other investors to keep them all on their toes and moving forward. And then last but not least, you should be sending a regular company update to every investor in your funnel who has not told you, no way in hell, they should be getting a regular monthly update from you. This is something I've been telling founders. Like I said, I probably wouldn't start a new round right now, but what I would start doing is I would reach out to every investor on my target list in a one-to-one email saying, hey, we're not raising right now. We're planning to raise in Q3 or Q4 or whatever. My company, I've identified you as a really good investor fit for us. Could I add you to our monthly company update list just to give you an early peek at what we're building, right? So your ask is, we do it in a monthly update? Can I add you to my distribution list? And many investors will say, sure, no problem, right? They're driven by fear of missing out on good deals. It's an easy ask. And you start sending a monthly update to investors. And this is just an example of what they look like, right? A little overview about your business, monthly or quarterly highlights. What are the good things your company did? This is maybe a few too many metrics, but key metrics. If you've got new products, put it in a screenshot in here. actually, this is the wrong update. This is to my existing stakeholders. I would create a separate one for prospective investors. Let me go back to that. Sorry. Prospective investors, you start with a little refresher about what you do because they're getting a lot of these updates. So you got to remind them what you do, and then focus on key wins, any new products, some metrics, looking ahead, and then a team shot. This is us at South by Southwest last year, which I'm sad we didn't get to go to this year. But what you're doing here is you're connecting the dots with these investors between kind of your vision about the business, your progress, right? And who you are. That's why I always say put in a team shot every single time, different team shot of who you are, connecting the dots between business vision, progress, and momentum, even in a tough market, and who you are. And the other kind of cool thing is adding a little section like looking ahead. You're telling investors what you're going to be doing next month. And then in the next month's update, you report back what you achieved. And you're just creating credibility by showing you can plan and execute and report back on that. So this is what I would probably be doing right now if I was planning to raise money later this year, is build that list of investors and start sending, get their permission and start sending them religiously a monthly update. And the cool thing is you can track and see like who's opened your update and how much time they spent. So if you send this out to 200 investors and 100 of them are opening it and 20 of them are reading it, 3 or 4 minutes, those are the people that are going to write you a check in the future. Okay, that was my final product placement plug. Thanks for sticking with it. Last but not least, when you're actually in fundraising mode, the more you can treat it like a full-time job, the better results you'll get. I know people who give some of their duties to a co-founder so they can just go in all in on fundraise. I even know a couple of startups who have hired like a part-time COO that they can push off stuff on. And last but not least, you're going to get an ulcer or think you're getting an ulcer halfway through. I thought I was getting an ulcer. I actually asked my dad, who's a doctor, for some ulcer medication. I went to Walgreens. They're like, oh, it's $200. So I didn't get it. And it didn't get an ulcer, but I thought I was waking up in a cold sweat 2 or 3 nights a week, during diligence. Just a few more quick hacks here. We did some retargeting ads. You can't specifically run ads advertising your funding deal unless you're doing like Reg D crowdfunding. I forget the exemption there, but you can advertise your business to these investors. One of our angel investors who wrote me a $70,000 check said every time he logged into Facebook, he saw FounderSuite. And, I think it probably subliminally connected the dots for him. Also, if you can get any PR or positive press while you're fundraising, that's great. So if you're sending a monthly update, you're targeting ads to these investors, and you're, maybe getting some press, you're just staying top of mind with these investors. This is marketing 101, right? Use FounderSuite or DocSend or something so you can track and see who's looking at your deck. Some investors don't like that, but the advantage of having an online version of your deck versus, show you what this looks like, versus attaching a PDF is that, as I mentioned a couple slides ago, you should be constantly improving your deck. And so this link that you sent the investor 2 or 3 weeks ago always points to like the latest and greatest version of your deck. Whereas, for a PDF, the moment you send it, it's like out of date. So that's the advantage of having an online version of your deck. Some people say use Facebook to try and find mutual connections, might be a stronger signal. AngelList could be useful if you already have 2/3 of your round committed. Angel groups, there's hundreds of these all over the world. The advantage is you can, pitch in front of 60 investors at once. The disadvantage is you usually have to apply and go through a screening committee. It can take a couple months. Last but not least, equity crowdfunding. I believe equity crowdfunding has great potential, especially if you're a consumer product and it's really a unique consumer product, or if you have a built-in audience that you can drive to a crowdfunding campaign. It's a myth that you can put up a splashy landing page and investors come to you. Almost every equity crowdfunding site, before you can go in live, you need 1/3 of your round already committed, and you really need to drive eyeballs to your campaign. So it's not for everyone. it's as much work as regular fundraising. Okay, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but if you don't have a lead investor, if you're talking to a lot of angels, the hack here, every time you talk to an angel, say, what kind of commitment level would you be comfortable with, how much, and on what type of terms, and you collect all these soft commitments until you're 20 or 30% oversubscribed. And then you go back and say, everyone's like, this went faster than expected. We're actually oversubscribed. Here are the terms. Do you want in on the deal? And those terms that they had often will evaporate. So you can read this. I can send these slides if you want to study this a bit more. Almost done here. So be thinking of your good fundraising questions. Couple hacks on closing the round, right? We've been out fundraising for 2 or 3 months or longer. Every time you have a pitch meeting, don't conclude your Zoom call or in the future a face-to-face meeting until you've asked their interest level. So for example, hey, great meeting with you. Thanks for taking the time. I'd love to hear, what your interest level is, what your typical check size is, and what are next steps, and then just stop talking. And you'll get a lot of, we'll talk about it at our partner meeting. But if they include a next step in that answer, that's a good buying signal, right? Number 2 here, another key hack is, again, like, great meeting with you. I love sharing a vision of FounderSuite. I'd love to hear how you help your portfolio companies and how you would help me build FounderSuite. And then again, stop talking and make them actually pitch you a little bit on their value add, because every investor who's been for a month lost out on a competitive deal where there were more investors than there were seats at the table. So you're subliminally making them actually pitch you, and you're signaling that it's not automatic they can get into your deal. And especially as you get momentum going for your round, your confidence in this will get better. And like I said, investors they have a sixth sense for when a deal has momentum. And if your deal actually gets hot and has momentum, investors will be elbowing their way to try and get in. It's amazing. And you have all the leverage at that point. It's hard to achieve. You know it when you get it, right? It can take multiple meetings before you get a yes or no. My kind of rule of thumb, if I've met with someone 6 times and they still haven't come to a conclusion, they're probably just tire kickers and I move on. Same with getting a no. It can actually be hard. A lot of investors will ghost you. Very common. A lot of them will give an excuse like you're too early for me or whatever the excuse might be. I actually created I think it's kind of amusing, a couple extra columns on my pipeline or my funnel. Just show you really quick here. So I've got my hard no, my said no, and then I've got a no response. This is where I move people who ghost me. And then for people say, oh, I like you, but you're too early, I move them into my revisit for Series A, right? These are people I might come back to later. I would still keep them on my company update distribution list. I'd probably remove the people who said hard no, right? The no response, kind of judgment call there, whether you keep updating them. But the people who say too early, keep them in your funnel. When someone does say yes, we do Paul Graham's handshake deal protocol. This basically means, on the Zoom call, they say, I like it, mark me down for 50K. You just go back to your email after the Zoom and say, hey, really great chatting with you. Just to confirm you're in for 50K, can you just write back confirming that? If they write back, you pretty safely move them into your committed column. If they don't confirm, they're still just a prospect and should be treated as such. Last but not least, if you're going to raise money, don't stop until the wires actually cross. The joke is, how do you know when an investor says yes? When their check clears, right? You can get yeses that aren't actually a yes, right? A term sheet is not a definitive yes. It's a good sign of interest, but it's not a definitive yes. The only yes is when the money is in your bank account and you can celebrate like Bachman here. We're almost done. Put this all in perspective. You just raised $1 million in a COVID market. I would love to talk to you for our podcast and hear how you did it. This buys you, 12 or 18 months of runway. That also means you need to start preparing for your next funding round, 6 months from now, right? So put it all in perspective, get out there, celebrate, and then get back to hustling. We've got some discount codes if you're interested in using our platform, Nashville EC Monthly or Nashville EC Annual. I'll plug a couple things, then let's open it for questions. But pretty good blog, lots of good hacks and tips on there. Got a Facebook group, not very active, about 1 or 2 posts a week, but you're welcome to join. The thing I would like to plug is this podcast. It's on Spotify, iTunes, called How I Raised It. We've got about 150 interviews on there of founders from all walks of life, all locations, not all locations, but diversity of locations, diversity of business types. And we just get into the details of how they raised their rounds, and we really get into nitty gritty. So I've learned a ton from this podcast. So check that out. And some other examples of like updates and stuff. I can send you these. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Yeah, that is the talk. Should we open it up for questions?
Awesome.
And Haley, doing chat or talking? Oh, thanks, Nancy. I guess that was a thumbs up. Or were you scratching? Okay.
You have just
I'll take it.
a heck of a lot of work that I have to do here. It's amazing.
It is a lot of work. And I always ask people, like, did I scare you off or did I get you more motivated and pumped? I think a lot of times this talk scares people away from fundraising, which is probably healthy, right? So, yeah.
Bob, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, always. I am, it seems like a lot of work, but it feels like it's like you have to do it. What I heard was a general investor orientation pitch and not a COVID-19 pitch. I didn't hear any, like, in this environment, we need to, I mean, is it just doing more of the same? Is there any specific tips on, we're going to have more meetings virtually, I suppose?
Yeah.
What's the appetite out there for the VC land during COVID?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yes, the overall strategy doesn't change much, but there are a lot of things that do change. So investors, I'd say, for the past couple of weeks have been, especially for the first few weeks of lockdown, were dramatically adjusting to it, right? They're all adjusting to working at home, helping out their companies, many of whom are struggling. Like, that's become a bigger focus of VC's time now. So that means their review of new deals is diminished. VCs are adjusting to homeschooling and stuff like that. So they're having to further reduce their time they can spend looking at new deals. So it's all slowed down. Some sectors, healthcare, education, tech, any kind of workforce productivity are still screaming hot. And I'm seeing some things, I've seen deals happening in the space if you're sort of like benefiting from this COVID market, which is sort of strange. So the process is the same. I do tell people, like, your hit rate of response rate, like I mentioned, historically is about 5 or 6% for most startups. If you've done a good job of building a funnel, it's probably more like 3 or 4% now. And as I kind of mentioned, I would probably not initiate a new round right now, but I would spend my time, because of all those factors, of all those headwinds I just described. VCs have fewer time to look at new deals, and everyone's just kind of waiting from our data to see what this market will look like when we start to open back up. I would probably spend the time building my target list. It takes 50 to 100 hours to do that research, to have a really good list. And I would start to reach out and start to send investor updates, building and nurturing that relationship for September, October, November, January 2021, when you really say, we're fundraising now, we're flipping the switch now. That's what I would really focus on if you have the luxury of doing that, but there are all these like situational dependent things. If your company is benefiting from COVID, I'd be trying to fundraise right now. If you're in travel, I would do the other strategies. So I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
Any other
Thank you.
questions?
Yes.
It's an unusual time for sure. You know, the other kind of, almost on the putting a positive spin on it, you have the world's investors are all sitting at home as sort of a captive audience. So it can actually be kind of an interesting time to rack up a bunch of Zoom intro calls. Will they invest before meeting you face to face? Jury's out on that. I actually had a subscriber, a new customer come on yesterday, brand new customer, subscriber found, and like, he's like, we just closed our term sheet, all virtual. So it can happen. I'm not saying that's going to be common. Most investors will still want to meet you, but yeah.
Hey, Nathan, this is Jeremy from the Entrepreneur Center. Thank you so much for the session. It's been I love the applicable nature of it, very like tangible, step-by-step kind of stuff. I love it. What's the one thing, like the most important thing not to do?
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
That could be an hour call.
Sure. Maybe that's your next session, but if you could just, give us a high level. What are the biggest
Picking
things?
the one thing is hard. The mistakes I see most common, having a poorly targeted list. I mean, it's almost the opposite of what I've described. Having a poorly targeted list, spamming or blasting out, you know, we get companies coming on our platform wanting to like blast 5,000 investors at once. I'm like, that is not going to help. It's going to hurt you. And I see a lot, like I mentioned, I see a lot of startups going out with a just fuzzy pitch, like it's like muddled. And again, you have to put yourselves in the shoes of investors where they're getting 50 of these a day. They're sitting through 30 pitch meetings a week. Like if your pitch is confusing at all, it's just a no. So those are the three things, like not being targeted, not being disciplined, and not having a really crisp, clarity of thought around your pitch.
Would you say it's in that order of like importance?
Gosh, that's a great question. I'm going to put pitch, having a poorly focused pitch, as number one mistake.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you can sometimes have a little wiggle room on the targeting, right? Sometimes you'll have a slightly off target investor connection, but they're like, this isn't what I do, but I'm happy to refer you to someone else. Sometimes you can get a little wiggle room around that. So I put that number two.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
What else, guys?
Any other questions? I think a lot of people honestly had a 2 out of 2.
I have one more.
Keep going, Jeremy.
In terms, you hear a lot about like, and sorry if you covered this on the early portion, but a lot of people talk about within sales and with like when you're trying to get something to always like take the approach of.
I just lost his audio.
Sorry about that.
He muted himself.
Yeah, I'm on. So, people talk about how can I add value. So can you speak a little bit to that from a founder perspective on not just the approach that's like I'm taking, but how can you like, what are your tips or tricks on communicating how you can add value to the investor? And is there opportunities even outside of just like investing in your company that would maybe like make an investor's ears perk up? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think kind of on that theme and another hack, if you want to call it a hack, is Mark Suster he's a VC with Upfront Ventures, and he's got this great post that's been around for years, but it's called Investors Invest in Lines, Not Dots. And the whole concept here is like investors want to build that relationship with you over a period of time, see how you think, see how you act, see how you execute before they write you a check. And that can take multiple forms. Doing this regular company update is showing your execution ability, your credibility, but being helpful to investors, whether it's referring a deal to them that maybe they wouldn't have seen otherwise. That's great, right? I mean, like anyway, and that can come in multiple forms of how you can kind of proactively, build that relationship and pay it forward before asking them for money, right? And so I'm not sure exactly that was your question, but if you can do that, you kind of had to insert yourself into the process early and start to build those relationships, and just being helpful can be helpful to other founders that will help you build that credibility, and being helpful to investors.
No, that's super helpful. The only thing I would add to that is Monique Villa, who's an investor here with Mucker in Nashville. I don't know if she might be on the call. I can't see everyone, but she said something on a panel one time where she's like, look, like investors, sometimes founders treat as just this like, thing that they have to do, and they're blasting and they're asking, but like she's a person, and like she desires to sort of like have a meaningful relationship, and that's how she does business, and that's how most investors do. And you always hear the phrase that investors invest in the founder, not the company, because they want to trust you. So I think that's an important thing for all the founders to hear is like, how can you, like, if you were their friend and they told you that, hey, maybe you're not the right stage, but we invest in companies that have $500,000 in revenue, and you come across one, like, like you were saying, introduce them. Or if you see they invest in ag tech, and then you read an interesting article, like pass that along. I think there's like, and like I would hope that you could do it I hope that the founders can do it in an authentic way. I'm not just saying like, try to over engineer fake interaction so you can get money, but really approach it as if like this was that they're a person and that they have a job to do, but also they don't want to be treated as just like a bank that you can just go in and try and like work.
Yep. I love that. Investors are people too.
Yeah, sure. All right.
The other, just one more bit on that. I've mentioned this podcast we've done. I've interviewed like 150 founders, and almost to a T, they talk about how they've built those relationships in advance. And sometimes it's even going to the investor and just asking for advice or feedback, before asking for money. And you've heard this, like, ask for advice, get money, ask for money, get advice. But, and again, I wouldn't over engineer it, but, reaching out to investors like, hey, we're not raising money. I'm not hitting you up as a bank right now, but like, I'd love to kind of get your opinion on our direction. Asking for advice is another way to start to initiate that dialogue and relationship. So.
Awesome. Thanks.
Good stuff. Any other questions? Is anyone in this room actively raising right now? Be kind of curious if anyone's like hustling. Okay. Got a couple.
One person. There was a few on earlier that I know I've spoken to that had planning in Q2 to start raising, but I haven't heard updates of whether or not that is continuing.
I'm definitely going to get a foundersuite account after this.
Hey.
Yes.
That'd be great.
We got to get you to Nashville at some point, Nathan, after all of this.
Oh, I'd love to. No, and you can't Zoom bomb a live event, right? Not
that
really.
was terrifying. It's crazy because I've been running these events, and this one is, we did them with like 150 people, but definitely need to set more precautions. Learned a lesson. Is there any more questions? Awesome. Well, I think then we'll wrap things up. What I'll do is I'll get the deck from Nathan, and I think I'll probably take the recording and edit it perhaps, and then send it out to everyone. But thanks so much for tuning in, and thanks, Nathan, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Reach out if you have questions. Happy to help.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.